Are you planning the holiday to Barbados as well?
Unfortunately not. No, I've spent a lot of time yesterday evening and this morning talking to our members across the health service, as you say, nurses, healthcare assistants, porters, paramedics,
Yep.
who are all extremely disappointed with the government's offer,
Yeah.
and also extremely angry about the way that it's been communicated and the way that the government's handled this entire discussion about pay over the last year when they've given so much during the pandemic. So I mean, it's not quite celebration.
No, I can understand if you're looking for 15% or even something like 10% and you get 3. I can understand how that would feel. The government would say, of course, well, it was going to be 1, and now it's 3. So it's 3 times what it originally was. So be grateful for that, Stuart.
Well, healthcare workers in Scotland have already agreed a deal of at least 4%, which is going to be more for people on the lower bands, the people who are lower paid in the NHS. So for the government down here to say, after all this time, that 3% is all they can afford, when they've spent huge amounts of money, and we know they've spent tens of billions of pounds on things like test and trace.
37 billion as far as last time I looked.
Exactly. Yeah, huge amounts of money. And the crucial risk here is that we're all dependent on the NHS, whether it's maternity services, mental health services. It's not just the acute side of things. And we're all dependent on the NHS to deliver the vaccine programme, which is our route out of the pandemic, and also to continue vaccinating the vulnerable people and also young people and children against flu and other things like that as the year comes on. So we really need the NHS to be fit for the future. And that is completely dependent on staff morale and staff being able to do those jobs. And so many of them have been through so much that they're really questioning how valued they are by the government.
Yeah.
And the government's missed a huge opportunity to show them just how valued they are, because we know that the wider public really do.
No, I think you're right. Is it because we can all stand on the sidelines, whether it's yourself as somebody in this industry, whether it's me looking back as a broadcaster, we can all say, of course, we nurses, doctors should be paid more money, but then of course so should police officers and firefighters and various other people involved. What about shop workers, also at the front line? And that's largely a private affair, but lots of people are very deserving, and the pot isn't always full. I think that's probably the answer you're always going to get, isn't it?
Well, it's not about turning one group of workers against another, as you've said.
Well, it's not turning, it's just the reality, isn't it, that there's only so much money, so you're getting 3%. The police would look at that and say, well, where's our pay rise?
Well, exactly, and we would support decent pay rises for all other workers in public services and across the board. Obviously, people working in the private sector deserve a decent pay rise as well. But as you've said, the whole country understands just what the NHS has done for them over the last 18 months and much beyond that. And it's about the huge value that the NHS gives to this country. I worked in intensive care at times during the pandemic, and it's really, really difficult to put into words just how skilled the people working there are, and not just in the acute services, but people have transformed services to go virtual, to keep on providing the help that people need throughout the entire pandemic. They've shown extraordinary skill, and we absolutely need the NHS to be fit to continue doing that for us and to help us get out of this pandemic. So it's not so much a question of whether we can afford it, it's whether we can afford not to show the NHS.
And 40,000 vacancies, as I understand it, in nursing, Stuart,
and that's in England alone.
And that's England alone. It suggests there are people not gravitating towards that profession as they might have once done.
No, the entire profession of nursing needs to be revalued. We need to make sure that people can see that it's a degree entry profession. It requires huge amounts of skill, huge amounts of knowledge. And there'll be lots of people coming out, going to work in the NHS, really struggling to cope with the workload that they've got and the pressure that's on them. And we know that lots and lots of people are considering leaving. So as I've said, we can't afford not to value the NHS properly. And what Unison was asking for was a flat rate £2,000 pay rise across the board for all staff, because it's not just about nurses. The NHS is a team, and it requires everybody in the team to be working with each other. And as you've already said, the 3% looks like a low pay rise for people on lower incomes. And it doesn't even amount to the real living wage for many people in the lower bands in the NHS.
But there was a pay rise, wasn't there, Stuart, some years ago? I mean, Mitch has just got in touch and said back in 2018, the government gave nurses a 6.5% 3-year pay deal. It turns out that inflation over that period was 5.1%. They're now getting 3% pay increase against the 2021 inflation rate of 2.4%. So how are nurses being hard done by, he says?
Well, you need to look at it in the broader context of what's happened since 2010. Since 2010, during the period of austerity, we've seen pay held back across the board. Yes, there was the pay deal in 2018 went some way towards beginning to correct that. But in real terms, nurses and other people working in the health service still have a much lower salary in real terms than they did back in 2010. At the same time, as pressure on them, the complexity of their work what we're asking of them is just continue to get harder and harder their jobs have done. So yes, the last pay deal went some way to correcting some small balance in that, but there needs to be a continued sustained investment in nursing and the wider health service to convince people that that's the place they want to work. And if we don't do it, we're not going to continue to get high quality care. We're not going to continue.
Yeah, no, that's just a fact. I'd quite like to pay NPs less and nurses more. Is that a reasonable position?
Again, I'd rather not get into the putting people against each other, but rather just saying, actually, I'd rather have the MPs respecting the work that the health service has done and treating the health service with the respect that it needs.
I get it. Stuart, thank you for your time, sir.
I am spitting feathers with a capital F.
Go on.
I cannot get my breath listening to this gentleman called Stuart, who's been on previously.
The nursing union guy.
Whoopie-doo.
Go on.
I've got friends, colleagues in my industry I work in who've lost their jobs, they've lost their homes, they've lost their relationships, and the nursing union wants a what? 15% pay rise?
Yeah, it's bonkers, isn't it? 15% is bonkers. What
on about to these people? Listen, let's be frank, Ian. People sign up for the job.
Yep.
Nurses are vastly underpaid.
Correct.
But that's not my fault, that's not your fault.
True.
In the middle of a pandemic, they've been paid 100% of their pay.
Correct.
Because they've worked. I didn't earn a bean for 4 months. I'm far more fortunate than other people, but my business is on its knees. I work something like 16 to 18 hours a day to merely keep the business afloat.
Yeah.
So please, when I hear people like this going on the radio, I cannot get my breath.
So you support what I said, essentially, that the job maybe from the beginning should be worth more, but where we're at right now, the idea of asking for 10 or 15% is cloud cuckoo land.
All it is playing on the public's emotions. Let's kick people whilst they're down. Yes, we clap for carers. There's no denying.
Yeah.
They've done fantastic work. But I'm telling you, it is in the DNA. It is in the job description.
It's not as I totally agree. I'm not into the worship of the NHS thing. I'm quite French in that respect. The French look at their health system like they look at their transport system. They pay for it. It's meant to work. The romanticising of it doesn't really exist. And I hear where you're coming, Vernon. Thank you for that.